Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and when I'm not doing the robot and causing Goulash's spine to break consequently, I'm here at the Wolfula reviewing movies. Well, in this vid, I'm going to be covering a remake of a classic horror film, but this time it's not by Platinum Dunes, so there's a chance that it won't be shitty by default. Suspiria, which was released late 2018 and is a remake of the Dario Argento classic of the same name. The original Suspiria, about an American girl named Susie Bannon who enrolls at a dance academy in Germany that's essentially a front for evil witchcraft, really is a visual delight. One of the most beautiful horror films you'll ever watch thanks to the vivid colors of its lighting and fantastical art design. It also features some damn good gore besides, and has some wickedly suspenseful scenes. It isn't absolutely perfect in my mind, but most of the flaws are in the audio department. The acting is a little all over the place, featuring some cheesy dialogue and obvious dubbing.
I once read that names which begin with the letter S are the names of snakes.
I also have mixed feelings about the score. Some of the music is just too loud and too eardrum piercing. I have to turn down the volume during some of the music-heavy scenes and then turn it back up when there's dialogue.
No, it's nothing. I just feel a little weak.
Still, these are relatively minor gripes. Suspiria is a gem of a horror flick and definitely a must-watch for horror fans. Suspiria is also the first in a trilogy of films by Argento called The Three Mothers that are thematically linked, each covering a different sinister witch. Now we come to the remake, directed by Luca Guadagnino. Well, it's kind of a remake. The premise between original and new is largely the same. An American girl named Susie Bannon enrolls at a dance academy in Germany with some suspicious supernatural witchy shit going on. This time the academy isn't co-ed though. What's most different between the two films lies just beneath the surface. The remake setting is Berlin in the 70s and not Freiburg, and in case you don't know the history, well, Berlin was not a fun place to be during that time period. You know, it can also be argued that it's still not a fun place to be. I mean, it's fucking Germany, but it was even worse then. The change of backdrop to Berlin during the Cold War, and especially amid the German Autumn conflicts, injects the remake with an overwhelmingly tense atmosphere. One of the subplots happening in the background involves a hostage crisis, for crying out loud. The Suspiria remake is a supernatural horror flick at the end of the day, but it brings with it a heavy dose of gritty reality. The real world beyond the grim walls of the Tanz Dance Academy is a terrifying place any way you slice it. There's no escape from the horror. Might as well pick the witches. Speaking of which, well, let's delve a bit more into the plot, but most importantly, the other ways that it diverges from the source material. Susie, played by Dakota Johnson, may look like pre-fucked-in-the-head Lindsay Lohan, but she has a bit more of a backstory in the remake now as a runaway Amish girl drawn away from her chaste life to the world of professional dancing under the teaching of her idol, Madame Blanc, played by the thin white duke himself, David Bowie.
How did your journey towards us begin?
I went to New York, to the Martha Graham Center. I saw you there 3 times. I went once by bus, and I hitchhiked the other 2.
That's risky. Were you punished?
Yeah.
The Suspiria remake really puts more of an emphasis on the dancing than the original film did, which did have its fair share of dancing, but it wasn't a vital, memorable aspect of Dario Argento's flick. There's such a focus on dancing in the new Suspiria, though, that early on for a while I forgot I was watching a horror film and not a dark, gritty reboot of Step Up. The dancing does pay off, though. This isn't totally like being dragged to the ballet by the missus. You see, the witchcraft at the academy is much more upfront in the remake. In the original, in like the third act, they have the exposition guy show up and talk about witchcraft.
Oh yes, she was a very famous Black Queen. A powerful witch with a tremendous talent for doing evil. A real mistress of magic. She lived and died in this city.
And then it gets all witchy at the end. No, it's not like that. The remake is much more transparent about the witchcraft angle. There's a vast conspiracy within the Academy, and it's not entirely clear who all is involved with it until the end. It's a bit like scary, dancing Harry Potter, but, you know, not as lame as it sounds. In fact, the remake has a deuteragonist in the form of Susie's friend Sarah, played by Mia Goth. You see, Susie isn't quite the goody two-shoes she was in the original. She's a much darker character, and appears to be seduced Emperor Palpatine style by David Bowie.
What did it feel like? Inside you? Inside your body?
It felt like what I think it must feel like to fuck.
You mean to fuck a man?
No, I was thinking of an animal.
Alright then. So the role of actually investigating this potential coven falls upon Sarah's shoulders, under the behest of Dr. Joseph Klemperer, played by also David Bowie. Oh, I get it. They're doing a good and evil dual roles thing, huh? Neat. Also kinda weird.
3 mothers. Lost in time. Predating all Christian invention.
Really, the Suspiria remake on paper seems like it would be a typical direct remake that would probably also have tons of CGI, but when you get down to the nitty-gritty details, the remake is a different take on the concept of the original that goes far more in depth with its material and reimagines the witches. You see, dancing is much more integral to the remake because, well, that's how the witches do their thing. The Dance Academy isn't just some front for a witch's coven. It's how the witches train their future disciples in the craft, unbeknownst to them. When the witches dance, shit is getting fucked up somewhere, and these dances will kick your ass. The dances are a drastic contrast of beautiful, elaborate choreography and just nauseatingly gruesome, painful violence. Brings a whole new meaning to the expression killer dance moves. The gore in this movie is rendered in horrifying detail as limbs break, bodies spasm, convulse, and even unleash some piss. Yeah, this movie with its witch thing has quite a bit of young girl piss. R. Kelly would be in heaven.
They took my urine.
The use of practical effects in this film are great. They differ in that the original film's effects were beautiful and stylized, while this remake handles its gore in a much more grisly way. It's kinda hard to watch if you're squeamish. The remake also peppers in nightmarish montages of disturbing, provocative images that darkly foreshadow the events of the film in a creative, horrific way. So it's clear Suspiria is a good example of a remake. It stays true to its inspiration, while also taking the story into a new direction. All in all, good remake. Sounds like it might even be better than the original, right? Well, this is gonna maybe sound lame, but while I appreciated the deeper dive approach of the remake, I didn't quite appreciate the runtime. The original was only about 90 minutes. The remake is 2.5 hours long. One of my favorite films is Metropolis, which is the same length and a silent movie to boot, so I do like a lot of slow burners, but I don't know. I kind of prefer most of my horror movies kept relatively short and direct. Horror flicks typically have a lot of build-up leading to short bursts of satisfying terror. There are some exceptions, but this model works best within the 90 minutes that most horror flicks aim for. The Suspiria remake just has longer than usual stretches of build-up leading to satisfying short bursts of terror, and you know, this film does use this time to build up the characters and their relationships with each other more than you usually see with a horror movie, but I didn't necessarily come out caring about them more. The characters feel antiseptic at times, kinda bland. The performances were great, but I just wasn't really drawn in the characters that much, even though there was a lot more there. The Suspiria remake is just really long, and it's also split up into 6 distinct acts and an epilogue, announcing this fact at the beginning, which is a little pretentious. I kind of feel like this remake could have just been cut up into a TV miniseries instead of a movie. I think it might have been more of a hit with binge watchers than moviegoers, admittedly. I mean, the movie is long as hell, but I don't really have that much I feel like saying about it. This isn't exactly one of my longest vids. I've talked about movies under 90 minutes for like a half hour in the past. I could, if I felt inclined, delve deeper into the subtext layered throughout the film, the deeper meaning and all the imagery, and if you're that kind of person who gets hard over that stuff, and might even make a Suspiria explain video on YouTube, this movie has that shit in spades, but I didn't necessarily love this movie enough to want to give it the rewatch that it screams to have in order to properly dissect it. I also feel like, not going too heavy in spoilers, that the ending of the remake gets a little too wacky for my tastes. Like, I was sold on the movie's take on witchcraft, but then it kinda went down this much more Hellraiser route with a weird finale that felt like it belonged in Neon Genesis Evangelion. It was cool to look at, but it kinda killed the interest I had in the movie. Visually, Suspiria's remake shines, though. It feels like a modern take on the German Expressionism craze of early horror films, featuring some trippy, dreamlike art design. design. The production design of Tan's Dance Academy depicts it as a place composed of abstract shapes, solid colors, mirrors, lines leading every which way. Just a very disorienting, maze-like location to find yourself in that represents the dark conspiracy at the heart of Suspiria that stands in contrast with the more mundane environments of the real world surrounding the Academy. The art is in turn complemented by amazing shot compositions, but I am a little disappointed by one aspect of this flick's approach to its art and lighting. The color. The original film featured a vivid use of color. It's disappointing to see the remake look so drab. I know that, realistically, the setting of Berlin isn't going to be a fun, colorful-looking place, and admittedly, the subdued use of color does set the remake apart, but the lack of color just feels like the de facto thing that a typical modern remake would have done. Having a lot of color would have set the Suspiria remake apart from most horror movies coming out, I think, and maybe would have benefited the flick at the box office. But I don't know. Enough about the remake is different that I would have liked to see that one thing retained and made to work with the new setting, but that's just me, maybe. Now, I wasn't a huge fan of the new Suspiria, but I appreciated it. It did more than enough new to justify its existence and had a respectful, sophisticated take on the material. It was also just impressively put together. It's a shame that it didn't find more of an audience. Suspiria was a well-done remake that just didn't totally click for me, but I could see what others might have dug about it. I don't know whether I'd recommend watching the original first or the remake. I like the original more, but if you haven't seen either, seeing the original first might influence your perception of the remake, which isn't necessarily fair, but they are pretty different movies. I will say though that the Suspiria remake is probably an ideal way to get a girlfriend/wife into watching a horror movie. I mean, it's around Valentine's right now. You might have a new gal in your life that might need the right flick to get her into the horror genre, and Suspiria is definitely a chick flick by horror standards, what with the dancing, witches, and the fucking Tilda Swinton. I mean David Bowie. My wife Meredith isn't much of a horror aficionado, but she did get a kick out of this movie herself. Isn't that right, dear? Okay, rein it in, darling. This is my review show. I give Suspiria 2018 Pubic Hair in a Toilet out of David Bowie. You can dance if you want to. You can leave your friends behind. If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, and make sure to click that motherfucking bell. Also, be sure to keep in touch with me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Dr. Wolfula. And if you're feeling extra supportive, feel free to pledge to my Patreon at patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula. There's a new feature on my Patreon called Secret Shows that will be videos exclusively made available to my Patreon supporters, so check it out if you're interested. Finally, I'd like to give a very special thanks to my Platinum supporters on Patreon. It really is an honor to make content for such lovely people like you guys, and your continued support is greatly appreciated. Thanks again from your old pal, Dr. Wolfula.
It felt like what I think it must feel like to fuck.